indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
Germany's finance minister, Wolfgang Schäuble, is one of Europe's most experienced politicians with a career spanning 30 years. He's a key ally of Chancellor Merkel. So there was great interest when he appeared at the British Chambers of Commerce annual conference in London last week, sitting alongside George Osborne. He said Germany would cry if the British left the EU. I caught up with Dr. Schäuble afterwards, and we began by talking about the impact of the migration crisis in Europe. Had Germany been wrong to open its doors and invite in so many refugees?
Wir haben nicht die Flüchtlinge eingeladen.
We have not invited the refugees. The refugees come to Europe. Europe is confronted with the situation in the Middle East, and whether we want this or not, we will have to take on more responsibility. And I think we can do so better together.
If Europe is going to avoid having barbed wire between the borders and all the old borders going up inside the Schengen area, then there's a feeling at the moment that there has to be a much stronger, almost more military border around Europe. Do you share that view?
Ja, wir müssen natürlich die europäischen Außengrenzen.
Yes, of course. We will have to control effectively the external borders of the EU. That is quite clear. Any community that has no border controls within it has to control the external borders. But this is not the only question. It is also a question of cooperation with our neighboring countries, so that the number of those who want to come to Europe will actually be reduced down to a level that you can cope with. And the European summit on Monday will of course also involve Turkey, and we will discuss how, together with Turkey, we can better manage this problem.
You mentioned Turkey just now, and there's an obvious kind of deal to be done of some kind. But what would you say to people in Britain, for instance, who are very alarmed by the thought of 70 million Turkish people joining the EU and having free movement, for instance, to Britain?
Bis zu einer
Well, it'll be a long time before we reach the end of negotiations with Turkey about accession to the European Union. Actually, the German government has major doubts about whether Turkey should be a full member of the EU. But this is a question for the coming years. It is not a worry at the present time.
The German people are now having to absorb a large number of immigrants and pay a high price to look after them properly. And at the same time, the German people are having to deal with a lot of the costs of the euro crisis. Do you think, as a government, you have been pushing your own people too hard?
Im Augenblick sind wir ja in einer ganz.
Well, at the moment we are in quite a good shape actually in Germany. We have the lowest unemployment rate since reunification. We have the highest level of employment that we've ever had. We have the highest increase in real wages and salaries. The refugee problem, of course, needs a solution, a European solution. Those that will stay permanently will have to be integrated well. And once the number is reduced to a more acceptable level, then this will not be a problem. We've had immigrants from Italy, Spain, Portugal, Turkey since the Second World War, and it's been successful, and we've needed them.
Can I turn to the possibility of Britain leaving the EU at the moment? Because one of the things that people who want us to leave say, that in the end, Germany wants to sell German cars and washing machines and many other goods to Britain, and we have many things we want to sell to Germany. There would be a trade deal, and it would be a perfectly reasonable one, because it's in both sides' interests to carry on trading.
Ich glaube, natürlich werden wir auch hinterher.
I believe that of course we will still have trade. We also have trade with China and the whole world. But there's a big difference between having a common market with common rules, without any controls, a market that is open, and having trade agreements.
Isn't it possible for the UK to have the advantages of the internal market, the single trading area, without paying in and without accepting free movement of people?
No, you are either in the single market or you are not in the single market. And if you're not in it, then you have trade agreements. Of course there are countries within Europe that are part of the single market, but they still have to pay into the budget of the community, and they have to accept the free movement of people. So actually they have all the disadvantages of the common market, and they are not involved in the decision-making process of the internal single market. I cannot really see why the UK would be interested in staying within the single market without being able to make decisions about it.
im gemeinsamen Markt zu bleiben, ohne mitzuentscheiden.
For people watching, they might say, in the end, after all the fuss and the noise and so on, there would be a perfectly acceptable trading deal which would be good for Germany, good for Britain, and good for the other European members. You don't have to be part of the EU for Germany, Britain, and France to trade with each other.
Noch einmal, natürlich gibt
Once again, of course there's trade with all countries in the world, but whether you're within the single market or not is a major difference. And you can either be in it or be out of it. Whether the UK wants to stay in the single market will be decided in the referendum. But if the decision is taken to leave, the UK will no longer be in the single market. Unless you find a new treaty, a new contract where you can be a member of the single market without actually being a member of the EU. And you will still have to accept the free movement of people that goes with it. And you will still have to pay contributions. So it doesn't really make sense. And the British people base their decisions on common sense.
Die Briten sind Menschen, die sinnvolle Entscheidungen treffen.
What happens to the rest of the EU if Britain leaves? Are you worried about a slow collapse of the institutions itself?
Ich glaube, Europa würde schwächer ohne Großbritannien.
I believe that Europe would be weaker without the UK. The UK is a strong partner, and if the UK left, this would weaken Europe. And I do not think that it will be in the British interest either. Of course, if there was a negative decision, we would not commit suicide. We would still try to fight for the best. Let's say the referendum was to go that way. We would have years of the most difficult negotiations, which would be very difficult for the EU as well. And for years we would have such insecurity that would be a poison to the economy in the UK, the European continent, and for the global economy as well.
Die Wirtschaft in UK, in continental Europe und für die global economy as well.
Do you think the mood in the rest of the EU would be angry, would be vindictive, would be vengeful, or do you think European politicians would then try to do serious and sensible deals with Britain if Britain voted to leave?
Ja, natürlich zunächst einmal werden wir traurig sein.
Of course we will be sad to start with. And I think most in Europe will agree with the opinion that it will be to the detriment of Europe. It will be a weaker Europe, and this cannot be in the UK interest either. Of course, then we would try, and this is true of life in general. You have a setback, and still you try and go on. And we will certainly do so in Germany. But I do believe that it is better to avoid such catastrophes, rather than try to think how to get well again after the catastrophe.
Nach der Katastrophe wieder sich erholt.
Dr. Schäuble, thank you very much indeed for coming to talk to me. The German Finance Minister, Wolfgang Schäuble, and if you're wondering about the wheelchair, he survived an assassination attempt. He was gunned down in the 1980s and he just kept going. Now,